I'm really excited to be able to give this butterfly talk. This has been my one of my uh, most inspiring experiences from last year that I felt like has transformed me in so many ways that I can't stop talking about it. So I'm glad to have this butterfly talk as a space to share about something cool that happened to me last year and I created last year with a lot of amazing people. So the story of this, the in essence, what we did was a fellowship called the Nature and Culture Fellowship. But the story of this started from a year before that, was like the end of 2024, and I was like thinking about doing something cool the next year, and I was told to read this book called Hospicing Modernity. I don't know if any of you have read that book. Thank you, Peter. I'm glad you have. But I think that and I maybe I should start by saying I'm a wildlife biologist by training. I have been in India most of my life, but then after I finished my masters in India, I had moved to the US and I started working remotely from here. And I've not really had like the social and the environmental connection done very well throughout my education. So when I started slowly getting engaged with the social side to the environmental work that I was so passionate about, I was constantly kind of learning and unlearning a lot of things that I had learned through my colonial education systems and the westernized education systems, and then unlearning some ways. And one of the big leaps that happened was when I read this book called Hospicing Modernity. And the way Vanessa, she really does a very good job of like showing to people who have not who do activism, but like really telling them like what does it mean to be a real activist and what's at stake on the ground. And she's also kind of like scolding you a little bit in the book. But anyway, the whole story was that I read this book as my Christmas break holiday book. I don't know why I did that. And then I was like, oh my God, this is such a good book. I need to tell the world. And that's kind of how I've always been as an activist and an organizer. If I learn something, I have to tell everybody about it. Similar to what I'm doing now. So I was like, okay, so I now know that this lady did such a good job of telling me about this book. I was like, how do I tell the world about some of the key values and principles that she is talking about in her book? And then we were thinking, what if we could do an entire fellowship program around it, where we took people on a learning journey. And in that learning, unlearning journey, we actually did not teach them things, but we actually helped them unlearn their roots of their colonial roots, the parts of them that have changed. Like how has the systems of oppression changed their bodies and minds in so many different ways? Then what if we could help them remember their roots, which would be more ancestral roots that were actually present, that were beyond just what they remember from their childhood? And how do we start helping them change? Whereas before you change, obviously having clear space to grieve, and the grief of the loss that you have lost. Like I feel like I had a lot of grief about losing so much of my ancestral wisdom from being in India, and I had to grieve that. So there was a lot of this. We were thinking, what if we could bring in understanding systems of oppression, grieving what we have lost, and then thinking about how do we create something different, but by first having a deeper listening to to nature and our communities all around us. And how do we do that? And then moving from there into thinking of cool projects that people would have wanted to do all their life, but because nature and culture are put in separate boxes, or like social work and climate work and environmental work are put in separate boxes, you are never able to do them. So we were like, what if we gave people like really small projects to do that? And since this was a real experiment just coming out of me being inspired by a book, we were like, how do we do this? So we were like, we have to talk to people from all over the world. So I was with the Global Youth Biodiversity Network at that time, still a youth, but I'm now giving it over to younger youth. So this youth space was where I started. So I called a bunch of my youth friends from all over the world, and we were like, let's co-create this program. And then we sat on like a series of calls with like 10 different people to co-create this fellowship and this learning journey. And when we sent out the application, we were like, we don't know how many people will come for it. We had money for like 65 fellows to do this journey, but we don't know if we will even get 65 people. And we got 850 applications. And we were like, whoa, I didn't know people. There were so many people who liked this work. And that was quite interesting to see the kind of thirst that was existing out there for this kind of an access. So we did have to we had some amazing applications, but then we did have to cut down to the 65 people, and then we started this learning journey with like 65 people virtually from across the globe, and we put them on this huge learning journey with like 10 sessions, and every week we had to do a session. It was intense, but by like the part where we started doing like systems of oppression, there was like we were going into something deep, and we kind of started feeling like something was shifting in all of us, including myself. We were able to bring really powerful storytellers from all over the globe, from like Asia, Latin America, and Africa, making sure we had geographic representation, because oppression and colonialism is felt very differently in different parts of the globe. And then we were also showing them how living systems are, how indigenous living systems were there in different ways in different parts of the globe, and showing them that you can't just say there's one dominant culture. There is a dominant one, but there's also like indigenous ways of knowing, and which are still alive in this planet. So, and then we ask people to do like a cool a rooting exercise, where you kind of think about what are your own roots, and like really going into deeper into what has shaped you as who you are. And that was interesting for me too, because I realized a lot of my life was driven by meritocracy, and like, how I needed to do more to be even recognized in the world, and how I had to like let go of so many of those things that I had grown up with. So we had a amazing grief session, where we actually said even grief needs to be decolonized. So we said grief needs to be collective and in community, rather than with you and your therapist. So we had like 65 people on a call doing a grief session, and then we had like amazing breakouts, and we never I never thought I could cry in a Zoom call, but we did. So that's kind of how it went. And then from there we went into saying, let's see if we can go and listen to the earth, and like listen to some part of the earth. Like, so the practice we had to do was go for an hour, all 65 of us, and sit with nature. Any part of nature, it could be an ocean, a tree, anything. And then people went to the earth, and I was like, I don't know. What if the earth doesn't talk to them? What if the tree doesn't talk to them? And they say it was so boring and nothing happened. And I was so nervous, because obviously I was not myself. I had not tried it myself. I was trying it with them. And the kind of stories that people came back with were like mind blowing. Like the kind of conversations they had. I remember one of the girls from Senegal was telling me about sitting beside a river, and then she could sense into the fact that there was ancestral memory of her with the river, and the fact that she was playing there as a child, and how river had that ancestral memory of her and her tribe and everything. And I was thinking, wow, that's so cool that you have not like consciously thought about it, but that relationship always existed, and there was a beautiful like communication and conversation that these people were able to have with nature. So that was really cool. And then we decided to move into creating projects. So this was the part where they had to go in their own on their own and figured out things. And it was really interesting to see how projects were shaped before, and how they had a focus on like conservation or like protecting a wetland and things like that. But then after they did the unlearning journey, they actually moved into thinking about nature from like not just thinking of a wetland as wetland restoration, but you're thinking about how does the whole community come together to remember what that wetland meant to that community, and how it is a powerful relative, not just a resource to be extracted. We had people like in Afghanistan who had like these huge workshops with one of our youngest fellow who was 19 years old, who did a series of workshops in Afghanistan, where they were talking about like a green memory, and how they have to remember there is this part of them that had this connection with nature. So it was really amazing to see the kind of projects that were being done by young people all over the world, intergenerationally as well. And like just seeing the impact that something simple as reading a book could take you towards and create was something that I was quite blown away by. And I really thought, sorry, I realize I'm too fast, so I'm going to be slower. But essentially, I think what I wanted to share with all of you was how one simple story, or one story that has inspired somebody, can like change and have ripple effects on my life, and then on my life of at least 65 other people who are a part of this learning journey with me. And now we have become a community, and we are trying to see how we can continue the work that has been started, because there's so many ways in which people brought in art and culture and music and conversations and artists, and there were galleries, like art galleries put up. There were exhibits in zoos that were created. There were school conversations that happened like in school. So it was just a lot of diversity of kind of projects that people were able to come up with all over the world. And yeah, that I wanted to share this cool project with all of you and say that we want to continue doing something like that this year. Obviously, funding constraints always, but yeah, let's see if we could do something cool next year. And maybe some of you, if you find this cool, you could join me and we could do something cooler and better for this year and the coming years ahead. Yeah, thank you so much for giving me this time.